Welcome. Welcome to the Wiggs Institute, and welcome to our AI event. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here. This is our first large-scale public event of the Institute. My name is Zoltan Ach. I am the director of the Wiggs Institute. About 2 years ago, I retired from George Mason University, where I had spent years being a professor, and I was ready to go to Florida, play golf, restore my car, go swimming, and then visit Europe once in a while in the summer. I said, what a great life. And then I got a phone call and says, would you like to have a job? I said, no, I don't want any jobs. Well, you know how those things work. Next thing I know, here I am in Vienna, asked to set up an institute to solve the problems of the world for the next 25 years. I said, oh, that's a really easy job. I can't wait to do that one. So we set up this institute to think about the future. And the Institute has really two legs, which makes it sort of unstable, right? I'm looking for a third one. I haven't been able to find it. The first one is theory, right? What do we know about the world, where we are, where we're going, right? And then the second one is practice. How do we go about making those things happen? This event's about practice, right? It's about AI. What are the pressing problems that we face, right? If I asked you, each one of you would name at least 6 of them, and then we could talk about which ones are really the most important, the least important, which ones can we solve, which ones we can't. So the first thing I'd like to do is introduce Naomi Besedes. She is the deputy director of the Institute. And if it wasn't for her, none of this would be working. So, Naomi, let's give her a big round of applause. What inspired me to take this job, right? It's like, it wasn't money, right? And I'm beyond that. And it was this. 100 years ago, Budapest and Vienna were the 2 most important cities in the world where the future was invented. In the social sciences and in the physical sciences, mathematics, physics, economics, psychology. It was the cafe life where people sat, thought about the future, and invented things. So it reminds me of a story. Max Planck, the great German physicist, and Sigmund Freud were sitting in a cafe, I'm going to make this up, right across the river, probably, right? From the Danube's right over there. Of course, it's not the real Danube, you know, that's a canal, the real ones, but anyway. And Sigmund Freud looks at Max Planck as he's sipping his cappuccino, says, you're really lucky. Max Planck says, well, I still have hair, you know, is that it? He says, no. Only 6 people understand what you do, quantum physics. He says, my discipline, sex and psychology, everyone's an expert. So here we are facing the 21st century. So it helps to take a second and ask, how did we get here, right? So let's think back to 2000. Well, everybody was alive then. Here, some of you were real young, some of you were grown up, some of you were older like me. And here's what Edward Wilson, the great evolutionary biologist, said about the 21st century. He says, we entered the 21st century with Stone Age emotions. right? Our cognitive abilities come from the Stone Age, right? Thousands and thousands of years of evolution, right? And when I look around the world, I'm like, oh yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on. Two, we entered with medieval institutions, right? The Magna Carta is like 900 years old. The American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is like 200 years old. So a lot of our institutions are really old. But we entered with godlike technologies. You know, my lifetime, I remember when we had no cell phones, no internet, none of the toys and tools that make our lives what it is. We invented all of those in the last 20, 30 years. Let me just give you one example. In 1971, the United States invented the future. You can go look it up on the internet, they'll give you a whole thing. And one of the things that was invented was the microprocessor, right? The Intel 4004 chip. Oh, you guys know that. And this tells you what's happened in that. That chip had 4,000 transistors, right? The little something to turn things on and off. The latest chip has 50 billion transistors. It's beyond understanding. When you take a picture with your smartphone, it makes 1 billion calculations in a second. That's why we can take nice pictures and not know anything about photography. So here's the question. Is this world we're in today sustainable with our institutions, our cognitive abilities, and our technologies? And I'll give you the answer. I have no friggin' idea. And I don't think anybody knows. How do we get over the next 25 years, and how do we move into this century? So I think this is the great challenge. So when I decided to take this job, I said, I got to come up with something to study. And all of you know there's 10,000 research institutes, at least in the world, maybe 20, studying everything. And I said, what is there that we can study that would make a difference, help us improve the world, and no one's doing? So I did a little research, and I came up with what I call the ice cream cone theory of happiness. And it's easy to understand. Now, when I was young, there were only 3 flavors of ice cream. How many are there today?
The lemon does not exist.
I know, right? Yeah, it's crazy. There was chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. So think of an ice cream cone with those 3 flavors in it. The first one, that's vanilla, my favorite ice cream. That's my background: innovation, entrepreneurship, startups, technology. I've been in this business for 50 years. When I first started, I remember I went to my boss at Columbia in the business school. I said, I want to study entrepreneurship and startups. He says, you're fired. I said, why? He goes, stupid subject. We don't need people like you. I said, oh my God. So I went and asked a friend, I said, what do I do? He says, keep doing it, but got to find another job. I said, okay, I'll do that. They got fired again. Took forever. So that's the first cone. That's important. The second one is international relations. How countries get along with each other. Diplomacy, technology, right? All those things. And so I now have 2 controversial topics, right? Because not everybody likes, how many of you hate entrepreneurship? Well, otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? So I know that. But if you go and talk, lots of people think, well, this is terrible, you know. They say, Elon Musk, right? Rich, the world's terrible. So I needed a neutral topic that was very important. And it took me a while to think about it. And the third ice cream cone, ice cream, is well-being. Right? How well do we live? Right? It includes everything from what we eat, to exercise, to our relationship with people, stress. Everybody here is interested in well-being. You'd all like to feel good, be happy, have a nice life. So what has happened in the last 25 years, right, to this ice cream cone? The technology thing has accelerated, and it's slightly out of control. Maybe we'll get some insight into that, but if I read the literature and people, you know, we're worried about lots of things. Over dinner last night, they're all talking about at what age do you give your kid a laptop, you know, and when is it good? And serious questions. International relations have gotten worse. I don't need to remind you of where the world is. And well-being has gotten worse. We know that. And so these are, I think, three of the topics that this institute is interested in. And then the question becomes, do we have tools to help understand how these fit together? And we happen to live in a world, right, where we do have some tools, right? For the last decade, we've been looking and using big data in the algorithm revolution. We have AI, which we'll talk about today. And the third one is complexity science and networking. And so the Institute is about trying to use these tools, look at these problems we face, and think about how we move from today in 5-year increments to the world 2050. My theory is if we make it to 2050, we have hope, but we have a tough road ahead. So with that, let me introduce Peter Kovac. Peter is the one that put all this together. He is the practice side of the Institute, and with that, let me hand the mic over to Peter.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming. When we started talking about this event, what we should do and how, I had a crazy idea that we should have people from actually around the world coming together from, well, I must admit that I made a mistake because Africa is not represented. But you are, but not sitting here. But feel free to join us if you have something to add, really. But we have US, we have Asia, and we have Europe. Well, you are somewhere in between, right? Europe and US, you will soon have a chance to introduce yourself. Okay. And, you know, I really digged deep in my network to identify the right people that I know good enough and that I know are doing amazing stuff and can also represent their own, let's say, continents in this conversation. I pretty much met everyone through conferences over the last decade or so. Well, introduction, conference. Funny story, actually, he met me 12 years ago because he thought I was another guy with the same name. Actually, it's true. And we even look alike a little bit with that guy. And yeah, well, conference with Tanya and with you, someone mentioned that I have to talk to you when I was in the Philippines for a conference. But why don't you start introducing yourselves? I mean, you could read a lot about these people on the Eventbrite page. I hope you checked it. But maybe we could dig a bit deeper. So there's another microphone here. So we don't spread virus that much, at least.
Shall I begin?
Yeah, please do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Soman. It's lovely to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and we can go down the line. I am a venture capitalist. I started my career in Silicon Valley, investing at a fund and accelerator called 500 Startups. We invest early stage and globally, hence the international conferences that we have all connected at. And today I run a fund called Southpaw Capital, investing in fintech, health tech, and AI companies.
Thank you. And where do you live in the US?
I live in Los Angeles at the moment, and he calls it out because it's just a few hours south of Silicon Valley, which is really, I think, the like golden standard for tech and entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, my voice is back, but it's not that normal yet, so bear with this hoarse voice. I'm Bonnie Factor, I'm from the Philippines. So my story with AI began in December 2022. I was finishing a report. I was following up my team about the report. They're nowhere to be found. I said I need to finish this report on Twitter. This chat GPT was trending. And so I tried it out. But in Twitter, they were using it with so many different use cases. Someone was using it as a diary, feeding a diary of their childhood in it and everything. So I tried it, and my report, I was expecting it to finish for 4 weeks if I follow up my teammates. I was able to finish my report in 4 days. That's December 2022. And then I realized that the world is going to change massively because of this. That was December 2022. And then 2023, I was the only one saying, this is not plagiarism in the Philippines. And a lot of people blocked me because they don't like what I am saying. But now, the Philippines is the #4 in the world in user base for ChatGPT worldwide. And so that was how this began. I created 100 AI assistants. That's how I was able to connect to Peter, because I've been a hobbyist since then. And then I wrote my own ebook about AI because of all of that. And that's why I'm here, because that's what I have been obsessing about, curious about since that time. I've been a startup founder since 2017, e-commerce, and then hiring startup. I have a consulting firm. But this one, really obsessed. Like, not a day go by that I don't have a post about AI, because it's just too fast. Everything is coming in too fast. All of the launch are coming in too fast. The users are using each tool differently. And it's so exciting, and that's why I'm here.
Hey everybody, my name's Chris McCann. I live in California, here in Vienna for the first time. Thank you guys. I'm a VC, similar, GP of a fund called Race Capital, based in downtown Palo Alto, so smack in the dab of Silicon Valley. We invest all across early stage, mostly seed stage. We do a little bit later, a little bit earlier, but seed tends to be our sweet spot. And we're early seed investors in Databricks, Opaque Systems, Zeet, Vectera, Grok, PlayAI, a bunch of other companies. And then before this, I used to be at a bigger fund called Greylock Partners, working with 2 guys there, Reid Hoffman, John Lilly. Reid was the founder of LinkedIn. And then at Greylock, I was most involved with Figma, Discord, and Coinbase, all in the Series A timeframe. And then Greylock, they've been around forever. Greylock was early investors in Facebook, LinkedIn, Discord, Dropbox, you name it, they probably invested in it. So that's me. Good to meet you guys.
Okay, wow. Well, nice to meet you all as well. My name is Marta Ordech. I am from Barcelona, but I live in New York. And the world is very small, because I actually started my company, Garage Stories, back in 2017 in downtown Palo Alto, running a hacker house where Tanya lost a piece of clothes. Actually, apparently someone stole from her. So, and also, I really like you talk about obsession and passion, because one can really tell this passion that you have. And I think what got me here was, first of all, my obsession with storytelling and all these technologies that in 2016, 17, like VR, XR, and so on, that were kind of shifting the paradigm on how can we tell stories. And since then, I've always been obsessed on how technology is enhancing how we communicate, how we tell stories, and also how stories are the way we remember the past, deal with the present. And now one of the things that obsesses me is the future. And I think this is how I got into AI. At Garage Stories, we've been running hackathons and all kinds of formats, think tanks, bringing entrepreneurs, technologies, and creatives together to explore. At the beginning, XR. After that, it was any kind of technology. At the beginning, was more focused on how can we tell stories with technology. Now is more about the stories that need to be told around technology and how the stories we tell today are sort of creating the future we are building for ourselves, because it's very difficult to build a future we cannot imagine, and that's the role that storytelling plays in it. And of course, AI, we've done hackathons around it, and it's impossible to ignore this technology when looking into the future. And what makes me super interested about it is how are we coping with all of this as humans, because this is changing not how we work, this is changing everything. So that's it.
Thank you so much. I'm Peter Sabo. I never lived in the US, probably never will, but who knows. If the team today is 10 years in the past, 10 years ago I used to live in London, and I was working for the biggest gaming company in the world, the Flutter Incorporated, which you might know from PokerStars or things like that. Anyway, I don't judge you, so you don't need to raise your hand. You know, I was young and needed the money, but I was also thinking that maybe I should do something more, and back then I was already experimenting with machine learning. So I went back home to Transylvania, Romania, from which I'm originally were. Going back, I founded a startup called A-Stack, had a successful exit from it. Then I founded another AI startup. The previous one was predictive AI. We did predictions for future events, usually for e-commerce. But this one, the Tango AI, is generative AI. We generate images with privacy by design principle. And now this also matured enough to release a product. It's usable. And now I'm thinking of maybe doing the third startup early next year. So third time's a charm, I guess. So fingers crossed.
Okay, we have a few things on the plate, right? And I feel like we had a conversation with Tanya before coming here about that she believes there won't be VCs in 10 years from now because of AI. So I thought, why not talking about it's the leadership kind of thing, right? Maybe it's a provocative enough topic to start with. Would you like to start, Tanya?
Well, I'd first like to clarify and say that I think the role of a VC will absolutely be evolving over the next 10 years. But worst case scenario, we will become obsolete. Hopefully not. But yeah, it's definitely something I think that is top of mind for anyone who's, you know, working today. It's like, will AI take my job away, right? And so I think about how AI has developed over time and the access to information we have, and really how much time you save in every instance that you're interacting or leveraging AI. And so when you look at different industries, particularly in VC, we're middlemen. We are taking capital from other institutions, other organizations, other investors, and we are allocating them into companies that we have access and where we can win deals. But we were talking about some of the tools that have been really useful. For instance, I use Perplexity all the time. Have you guys played around with Perplexity? Well, you should. It has been incredibly helpful if you do anything within research. And for analysts and associates, a lot of the role is involved in understanding the market, being able to share information you know, that is proprietary. But with AI, I think so much of the role of an investor, being a VC, will evolve. And so what does that position look like within the industry? What is your value when you are investing in a company? Why is an investor that invests in a fund called an LP, a limited partner? Why are they investing in my fund when AI might be able to tell them which companies are top performing in a particular vertical, how to access that founder, those companies in that space. And so really it forces me to think about where we can provide value and what is unique to VCs and their offering when looking at how AI has sort of infiltrated every industry. And I think VC is maybe not top of mind when you're thinking about jobs to be taken, but as someone who has seen, when I was at 500 Startups, we invested into 30 to 50 companies per batch. So we were looking at 2,000 to 3,000 companies 4 times a year. And while that sounds amazing and exhausting and all of those things in between, what you really got to see was trends. You got to see companies building in a particular vertical, building in a particular space, leveraging chips, and you start to see, wait, why is there more activity in this direction? Why are there 300 new companies building within AI? Who's making these chips? What is NVIDIA? And so looking into the companies that I see now and where capital is going, I see companies investing in, recession-proof industries, and that I think is, fintech, health tech, but AI being one that we were even talking about earlier. We talk about it as an industry now, but I often think about when we were talking about mobile-first companies and how if you were mobile-first, that was an advantage you had, or if you were design-forward. But in a few years from now, do you still think that AI will be a vertical on its own? Or will every industry have it integrated? And so, 1 or 2 years, I think that's the optimist perspective, but I think the role of a VC is 100% going to evolve, hopefully not disappear, so we can all keep our jobs, but absolutely.
My heart rate went high. Well, now you got the mic, why not stay keeping it? What do you think on the topic or the leadership as such, how it's going to change, how it's going to be changed by AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very good point, right? Because that's not the first job that you have in mind that's going to disappear. Actually, I think that people who get more scared, right, is people who doesn't have decision-making jobs in a way. These are the first ones to get scared. And I feel in a lot of conferences or events I go, no one is thinking about that what they think matters. As in, it's like, oh, here we are the pioneers and this is what matters, but actually it doesn't. Because the power of storytelling and what people believe about something, it's way more important. It has a bigger impact on economy than what's actually happening. So what people think, what everyone thinks really matters. So I think with AI changing so fast and changing so many things, it's really important to address how people feel about it and not just decision makers, how everyone feels about it. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done in that sense and to kind of build visions for a future that are not scary, that are inclusive and where people feel reassured so people don't just like reject this or just kind of block out to all of these thoughts. Like I think it's important to kind of sort of start projecting, okay, what's the future gonna look like? Not an enterprise level. What is that gonna mean for me, for my family, for my kids, and so on. So yeah, I think that the challenging part is like how fast it goes, that it makes it really difficult, but it's even hard for yourself to predict what is actually gonna happen. Because you said you started December 2022. That's not even 2 years away. So yeah, that's the part that makes it like challenging. But I think it's a very, very interesting challenge at the end of the day.
So she talked about jobs. The Philippines economy is based on business process outsourcing. That's our #1 livelihood. And since December 2022, I already knew that AI is going to get that. And Chris, during our dinner last night, Chris has said that the AI agents that are up and coming are now on voice agents. In fact, my consulting firm, that's one of my business vertical, yeah. Hybrid, right? Hybrid voice agents with human in the loop. Still with the human in the loop, but we don't know until when that will be. And That's one of the things that I post on a regular basis, not to scare people, but to really think about what is really going to happen. Because we can think about it. We can create our future together. And the thing is, The Economist is very far from Silicon Valley. And the economists are the ones that are very close to country policies, international relations, correct? And it needs to be close. Technology and international relations need to be so close about what's happening to be able to create some sort of a semblance of a global policy. What are we going to do? Is it post-human labor economic policy? Yeah, because are we going to go capitalism all throughout? Is capitalism sustainable? There are a lot of questions because of AI. And talking about jobs, that's what I wanted to do, why I keep on posting. But also there's another part that says, don't be scared, it will not take your job. And I'm like, I'm not scaring people. I want people to think about what are we going to do, because we do have the power to create that future. And I'm going to give it to Chris because he knows the deals that are happening right now.
Yeah, I was going to, again, a lot of people in Silicon Valley love to talk about AI is going to take away all the jobs, or not going to take, I think that's maybe like a very too simplistic way to think about it. Again, if we could take the VC job, I don't know if this is a good example, but whatever, we'll run with it since you brought it up, Peter. Yeah, so if you look at what a typical VC analyst does, let's start with the easiest to automate to hardest to automate. So for example, note-taking on a call, pretty simple to automate at this point. Summary of the notes, pretty simple to automate at this point. Putting that thing into your CRM system, also pretty easy to automate. Doing research and competitive analysis, getting actually much easier. Doing data collection and data analysis type stuff, a little clunky, but still kind of possible. Deciding the decision-making on what to invest in, a little bit harder. Negotiating, convincing the entrepreneur to pick you as opposed to some other firm, a little bit harder. Negotiating all the deal terms and doing all the legal back and forth, harder. Talking to the LPs and convincing them to give you money, harder. So there's sort of a gradient scale of the easiest to the hardest things. And you could look at it, I guess, on a company level or individual level. I guess think about your own job, like whatever you guys do. I'm sure there's a lot of busy work that is kind of mindless, that doesn't take a lot of your time. In fact, you should probably just use ChatGPT or Perplexity to do all that stuff for you, and so you could relax for a couple hours. But you could also think about it from a company level. There tends to be certain roles and types of people that is much more root or automated in nature. BPO type stuff, customer service. It's kind of unfortunate, but people almost already treat the humans like AI agents at this point. They tell them what to say, they have scripts, they have, everything's kind of well documented for them. So again, from a personal level, company level, I guess you could even say like a country level, you kind of need to map out like what you and what your role and like what how easy and how hard it is to automate out, and then realizing these models will get better and better. So if the gradient is here and we're here, at some point this is going to tick up and up and up. I don't know if we're necessarily going to get to full AGI and we all get to relax and do nothing, but like this will ratchet up and will increase kind of over time.
Okay, so to just ground it up in a personal experience, I usually lead software developer teams, and they are usually just geeks like me doing a lot of programming, usually in Python or TypeScript. But what I have seen that compared to 10 years ago, the same output of usable production-ready code, maybe in a Git repository, for a team of 94 people was actually less than today it is for a team of 20 people. And this is not just because of machine learning, it's also because libraries evolved and a lot of other things. Maybe we think that we are better at management, probably we are not. But anyhow, we can see that just a simple deep neural network-based model like the Anthropic 3.5 Sonnet is a tremendous help in developing software much faster, and also the world is adapting because now people expect you to deliver much faster. The development cycles are faster, but I think that's not an issue because this might look frightening, but if you think back, maybe when the internal combustion engine was getting widespread and cars were being made, at that point, a lot of industry were based around horse-drawn carriages and feeding the horses and breeding them and whatnot. And of course, that kind of disappeared within a 10 years window. Or if you think a more recent thing, telephones used to have switchboard where switchboard operators just plugged out and plugged in when you made a call. In Romania, we had that even in the early 90s in Georgian, where I was born, or near where I was born. So that was a recent thing. And then, of course, international companies came in after the fall of the communist system, and automatic switchboard replaced all those people. But it doesn't mean that those people lost their jobs. So I'm not really scared of that aspect of that AI. There is a totally different aspect of machine learning, of which I'm much more and deeply scared, but that's not losing jobs.
I actually want to make a question. So, not just to you, everyone. So a reflection. All of these examples that people bring up when people say, oh, AI is going to take our jobs, for what you're saying, we're mostly based on an industry. It's, for example, a telephone. So let's say that they were more industry-based, so there was like a piece of the population that was like under this threat. But if we think about AI, it is kind of taking over every industry, and we are all in the same boat in that sense. And I think maybe here, what I work a lot with creatives, and now AI is also like playing a big role in the creative industry, where there is a lot of things that can be done automatically. So there has been a lot of challenges around what does creativity mean, what's the artist's role, and so on. But one exercise I like to do, and I try to do it with myself a lot all the time. Sometimes I came up with great answers, sometimes I really struggle to find them. But I think if AI is to do this, what are the things that we can do? And I mean it in a positive way. What does the workforce in 5 years from now look like? So for example, in your industry, how do you think that we can use all this human intelligence with this new AI layer? And I don't mean it as a threat, I mean it as an opportunity. Where will you see the opportunities here?
Well, thanks. Now just, you revealed that my example was not a good one, so I tried to pick a better example to just rectify the previous mistake. Thanks for that. So I think now a better example, because indeed this is across all verticals and all industries, where you can't just cherry pick one and say like, okay, like the internal combustion engine or the switchboards or whatever. But if you think back in the Victorian era, there was a very similar totally world-changing transformation, at least anchored in the United Kingdom. But if you think back in the Middle Ages, even in the late Middle Ages, in some areas, over 90% of the population was working in agriculture. And they had to do this because otherwise it was not possible to feed the population. Now, over a span which was extremely fast in the Victorian era, over the span of 50 years, that really decreased in the United Kingdom to first 25%, 26%, and today it is 2%. So from almost everyone working in agriculture, now only 2% of the people feed the whole United Kingdom. And this is because, of course, the Industrial Revolution came with a lot of innovations, a lot of different fields, but overall, not just the machinery, but also that, but also pesticides, also improvement in workforce, also machinery, also transportation. So lots of things contributed to totally changing this. And this meant a total worldwide change in some countries much later than the Victorian era, of course, but but about in the 1800s, somewhere in that period, it was also quite a disastrous change, and that's probably frightening. I'm not sure how many of you are interested in the history of the United Kingdom, but you might have heard of the Great Potato Famine of Ireland, where from 4 million people living in Ireland, only 1 million people were left. A lot moved to the United States, and unfortunately, at least 500,000, but more likely 1 million people died of famine. And this is because drastically the number of people working in agriculture dropped. Everyone was specializing in one thing, and that one thing at that case was the potato industry, pretty much. And when a disease hit the crops, everyone just died of famine. And I think this is something that tells us kind of a warning sign that now everyone is talking about how life-changing AI is, and everyone is now trying to introduce AI into everything. But the same thing happened because potato was the cheapest and most reasonable source of nutrition for millions of people, and population was growing rapidly. Everyone went into that, and everyone was putting their eggs in one basket, which was, of course, very vulnerable. So I think that's one of the problems with it. But just to not paint a very grim, dark future, I think that because usually those big transformational changes tend to improve people's lives and tend to free up people's lives. Another thing before the internal combustion engine, just to get back to my seemingly favorite topic today, in certain parts and not very far from here, in Baden-Württemberg, in southern Germany, and in Bayern, also southern Germany, in those parts, the automotive industry was booming, and this enabled car manufacturers such as Mercedes, which you might know, they enabled to reduce the work time for an average worker from 12 hours, which was a norm, and usually people were working, the usual lay people who were just toiling the fields or whatnot, they were working 6 days a week and usually more than 8 hours, so 10 to 12 hours a day, and that sort of time went down to what we know today, 8 hours and 5 days a week. And that was, at least in Germany and this part of Europe, that was first introduced because of the added value of the automotive industry. So I think, and I really hope, that because of the machine learning and because of AI, we will enable people to have more free time. Now we start to see 4 working days per week, not 5 like we had previously, and we see less and less actual human input needed, which frees up time. I think most of the people, I love my job, so not me, but most people, especially who do jobs that are not considered very engaging or very motivating, like imagine those people who just package things in a box in a warehouse and things like that. This is a kind of a soul-shackling job which has to be done. But if those jobs can be automatized to a degree which are already in some places, then you would free up those people, and those people could have more meaningful jobs and more free time. And ultimately, everyone would have more free time, and I really believe that we will reach 6 hours a day and only 4 working days in my lifetime for sure. And I'm not planning to die in, I don't know, 200 years from now.
I'll go. Yeah, maybe a more Silicon Valley example. There's a company called NVIDIA that you guys are probably familiar of, and a founder CEO named Jensen, the guy with the leather jacket guy. Currently, they have 30,000 employees in the company, and he is projected to have in the next 2 to 3 years, he's going to hire 10,000 agents, AI agents, as employees of the company. Employees, quote, quote. So instead of increasing the human employee count by 50%, he would increase the human employment count by 10% and offset that by having more AI agents doing much more of the work. So similar to the software thing, I think there's sort of a, again, very Silicon Valley perspective. People are assuming much, much, much higher efficiency from the humans that are there and offloading a lot more of the sort of grunt work, if you will, to AI agents that will work in tandem with the employees. So more efficiency, reduced cost, more agents, less hiring, reduce burn, reduce size of company for similar, if not greater output. That's kind of the driving, motivating factor in all this, and that's kind of like the underlying belief. And again, keep in mind NVIDIA is probably in the spectrum of companies that are on like the most bleeding edge of all this AI stuff. They're much farther on the spectrum. So your traditional company might not be more that extreme, but that's like the tail wagging the dog, if you will. That's going to be the most extreme case.
Yeah. So I just remembered we talked about capitalism, post-human labor economic policy, and the one pressing topic that we also need to talk about is, do we need universal basic income? Is that something that we really need to urgently talk about? Because if that's where it is heading, I know that the rest of the world is catching up to Silicon Valley, but it may take maybe 10 years to catch up to Silicon Valley. But you know, when you watch what's happening in Silicon Valley, if we're talking about capitalism, automation is ultimately the profit-making decision for capitalism. So if the world is to maintain that global idea that capitalism will bring us global growth, then, and the positive thing is, maybe we really don't need to work anymore. That is good for our well-being. But there are people who find meaning in their jobs. That's also good. But how do we now have an exchange of goods? How do we pay our house? That's a lot of other questions, you know, because it's good that in the future we may not even work. That's a really, really good thing. But the form of exchange.
How would you define work? How would you define work?
Well, yeah, I guess the way you define work is now you trade skills or time or both, hopefully, for money. I guess that's how you define work. Maybe in the future it's different, and maybe the definition will change. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's actually everything is for change, and that's one thing that sometimes when we are trying to imagine a future, we have certain ideas set on stone that we don't even think of. Okay, work doesn't need to be how I make money. Maybe work is just something to fulfill myself. So that's actually a very interesting question, because everything is possible to change. One thing that I feel is maybe there will be way more entrepreneurs. Like, people will be more self-sufficient in how they get the things they need. People will be having more of their own little startups. A lot of things will be maybe also more local, because I think everything has a counterpart. There is a big race in globalization, but there is also a race for people needing to connect with their neighbors and so on. And for example, just with, I've seen in New York that before it was like this big boom of Tinder, Hinge, you name it, whatever. Now there is, my Instagram feed is full of apps that want you to go to dinner. So like there is like a huge change, and also on how all of these technology is actually affecting our well-being and the things we need. So yeah, maybe we don't work anymore for money. Maybe there is more entrepreneurs. Actually, one of the positive things that I was reading in a future study is that because work dynamics are changing. We have more help with repetitive tasks, which require less time. A lot of people work remote. There is a rise of people pursuing side hustles. So I like to write, or I like to whatever that is. So there is way more people that are like starting to pursue things that before maybe they didn't have the time for. So yeah, but what is work like?
I think it's interesting you touched on the positives of like what we're seeing with AI and access to all of this, with so many people starting side hustles. Maybe that's not work, maybe that's not your main purpose, but I think the reason so many people have been, accelerated into self-employment, into entrepreneurship, is also because some of these mundane tasks are now, you don't have to hire someone to do it. You can automate them. They are automated. But while there is all of this good that we're seeing, I do think there's negative, right? And so when you're trying to get people to engage with each other in real life, as opposed to sitting behind their screen or computing or whatever it is, we talked about some of the other kind of byproducts of being so engaged in technology, with things starting from, like dopamine addiction. I've been reading about that recently. And what are the problems we will see arise within society in 10 to 15 years from now, when there is so much less human connection because so many things are automated? And part of what creates, villages and societies and communities is that human interaction. And so when I look at Gen Alpha, my friends and my cousins and their children who are, just preteens right now, every single one of them has a iPad or two or Xbox or some type of technology. And I can tell you that when I was 8 years old, I wasn't asking for technological products. And so looking at the way they engage, have you seen like 2-year-old, 3-year-olds swiping? They can swipe better than a lot of people. And so what I think is, wow, that's so incredible to have so much engagement with technology, but then what are the side effects of that? What happens when people are, exposed to this world, and then in 15 years from now, what are the problems we're gonna be solving? Is it technology that we'll use to solve it? Is it, regressing back into where we have more human connection? And so while I think there's so much positive that we see with it, there is a responsibility of understanding how do we develop AI ethically, consciously, and how can we sort of predict or try to understand what the consequences will be as well.
Do you mind if I bring in a new layer into that, which is the legal frameworks? So one thing that I started thinking about when you mentioned the universal salary and everything, when I subscribe to ChatGPT, I pay $20 a month, and I started thinking that maybe one day governments will actually force me to pay the employment cost using these AI solutions, because actually I replace human and they need the taxation. How do you think legal frameworks will change because of AI, and all how jobs will change because of AI?
And that's the job of our economist, right? So that's why I keep on posting, because Silicon Valley's job is to go all out on innovation. And we're watching Silicon Valley. The VC's job, are to go on the deals and further these innovations. And the economists are unfortunately lagging behind. And that's what I feel like is my sort of calling, because it feels like, hello, wake up, wake up. All of the countries needs to be able to know how to work together. Because the top two right now, Silicon Valley and then China, super neck to neck, head to head. How do you say that? But that race is there. It really, when OpenAI really saw China will really cling, and it's so good. And Europe, I am looking at you, because you have the infrastructure and you have the capability. And unfortunately, regulations are bearing down a lot of the things that you guys need for innovation. And Singapore has figured that out. So Singapore has been able to create a good ecosystem for entrepreneurs, to create a lot of startup founders there. But also, that started because Facebook's co-founder, Savirin, transferred to Singapore, and he was the first one, you know. They relaxed taxation just for Eduardo Saverin. And that was how Singapore furthered innovation, and now Singapore is in the top 10 for AI. But you have the infrastructure. You have the capability. Us in Southeast Asia, we only have the talents. And not all of our talents are at par in terms of machine learning, not yet. And in terms of data science, we still need to upskill everyone there. And we're having a hard time because all of us are into call centers. That was that was what our bread and butter. And now we're having a hard time catching up. And that's why I believe that Silicon Valley is doing their job. The VCs are doing their job. China is doing its very best to be able to come out as #1 here. And I think Europe needs to really level up in terms of, come on, we need you. The US is capitalism. And China is how do you say that? Authoritarian. So there, yes, something like that. But they want that power. And Europe has always been the middle ground, correct? But regulations is, putting down the innovation. And we need Europe to continue as the middle ground. Because right now, it's too fast. If the regulation keeps on coming in Europe, US and China will really win this race. And actually the world needs that Europe ideology of, let's think about other people, let's think about, yes, Europe has always represented balance, correct? Yeah, so I think that's it for me, more on why I post obsessively.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely not fit to represent the whole Europe. Maybe my waistline, but other parts not. I think that the start of the EU when it comes to machine learning was not a bad one, because the EU said that, okay, the startups in the EU don't have access to funding such as those in the States or those in China. So there are initiatives of HPCs, those supercomputers, especially made for machine learning to train large models. And actually the biggest of such supercomputers is in Europe, worldwide. It's the Mare Nostrum 5 in Barcelona, Spain. So I'm lucky to be sitting next to you. But also in smaller countries, for instance, in Hungary, we have the Kifu Komondor supercomputer, which is also made of the same A100 GPUs which were used to train the GPT 3.5 turbo model, which is behind the first version of ChatGPT and so far. So, and just to take a small example, because I'm working with the Kifu Komondor day to day, so I know that very closely. That supercomputer would cost, just the GPUs would cost upward of $14 million just to buy the GPUs, nothing else, not the cooling, not the housing, not the data center, just the GPU cost. Because the DGX servers by NVIDIA, a single DGX server, you probably know, it's $400,000 just to buy one DGX server with 8 GPUs. So that's outside of possibility of EU startups, or most of them that I know of, or at least it was for us. So the EU went ahead and created those publicly founded research centers for AI, and they were doing this for some years now. Even the Kifu Komondor in Hungary was put to public use 2.5 years ago, so it's not very recent news. The Mare Nostrum 5 is a bit more recent, but they they were Mare Nostrum's for and so far before that. So we had the infrastructure. There were also programs to help the startups incubate and also some state level funding in different EU states and also EU level. But on the other side of the coin, the EU said that the most important thing when it comes to technology, no matter what technology, is the safety of human beings and the privacy of human beings. So it's okay to do really amazing stuff with first with big data, then sharing those data, collecting those data, but don't use that against EU citizens. And this is why the GDPR legislation was made, and this is the core principle behind the EU AI Act, which now took partial effect and will continue to be enforced in the later years, in the next 3 years. And this is not a bad idea to begin with, because yes, it's regulation and it makes your life much harder as an AI startup. But on the other side, it helps you in different things. For instance, in the long run, I think that it might help you to protect the market of the EU, because it makes outside agents a bit harder to enter the EU market. I think a prime example is the new iPhone, which will have no AI capabilities in the EU because of legislation, but also it helps the EU startups to create really safe privacy by design solutions which can compete with those, at least that's the theory behind. And the other benefit is that by not selling the data, not sharing with third parties, not sharing any of that information outside of EU, it helps protect the citizens of EU, because they say that in some countries, and not take the most extreme like China, but even in some countries in the Middle East, like in the Emirates or Kuwait or Oman, they know pretty much everything about you, and that has pros and cons, and I don't want to go into a political debate about the merits of that. It's true that in Kuwait there was 0 violent crimes this year, and will probably no violent crime in the remaining month of the year. So that's a good thing. But on the other hand, when you enter Kuwait, they take your fingerprints, they give you a SIM card which you need to use because otherwise your costs will be exorbitant, and everything is under surveillance. And the EU said that such technology is prohibited by the AI Act. And also subconscious level psychological profiling by AI is also strictly prohibited. Now the thing is, do you want companies to manipulate you or change your very basic ideas on a subconscious level with a very sophisticated AI? And legislators in Brussels said that no, we definitely don't want that, no matter where their company is located. But if it's an outside company, someone who's outside of the EU, they are not allowed to move the data about EU citizens outside of the EU. So you can't use servers in the States or China to store data about EU citizens, which is also a security and privacy thing, but also national security thing. So I wouldn't say that it's inherently a bad thing, but as with all legislation, of course, it makes your life a bit harder. But then again, I think the legal framework which is now used in every country to say where you are allowed to drive and how you should drive a car makes your life much safer. Although you need to pass an exam, you need to have a driver's license, and you need to obey those laws of the road and make sure to stop at the red light. But otherwise, you could just do whatever you want with a car and get a car and, you know, crash into the other cars or whatnot. So everything is possible, and it's a matter of perspective.
I feel like I'm keep giving the Silicon Valley perspective, but maybe that's my job, I guess. There's a very two controversial statements, maybe. There's a very famous VC named Bill Gurley that gave a very famous talk called 2,851 miles For our EU friends, that's approximately 4,500 kilometers. That's how far away Palo Alto is from Washington, D.C. The whole idea, the whole premise of the talk is Silicon Valley is successful because it's so far away from regulation, not despite it. That the regulators tend to be so far behind that once these things are out there, you can't take it back. Once the kids have the iPad, you can't grab the iPad. They've already used to the iPad. It's too late. And so Silicon Valley people tend to build because they're interested in this kind of stuff. Maybe a second controversial opinion. The company OpenAI that we're all talking about, ChatGPT, OpenAI started off as a nonprofit. Their plan was to do some model things and figure it out. And they raised $500 million as a nonprofit. And they took this thing called the Transformer paper at Google and threw a ton of compute at it to see, I don't know, what would happen. And that kind of became GPT-1, GPT-2, and ChatGPT as we know it. The intention was not necessarily to build a product or replace, like, it was kind of to have fun, which is a really weird thing to say, because normally if you're going to take $500 million of investors' money, you probably have to have like a purpose around it, right? A business model, a plan, a revenue projection. People in Silicon Valley are kind of nuts. Like they don't, like that's kind of not how they operate. They build this stuff because they want to, because they like to, because they want to, I don't know, there's like an act of creation. I guess it's up to all the other people to figure out what to do with that stuff. But like, a lot of these bigger ideas and themes, like it tends not to be the driving force of most companies. For most seed stage companies, you raise your pre-seed and seed round, you're trying to build a product that any customer will buy that will pay for it, and you're literally trying to survive. Like that usually is the point. So again, maybe this is just the Silicon Valley opinion, but like a lot of these core technologies and how they're invented, you do need to think about, I guess, the motivations of the people about why they're doing it and how they appear. And I guess that now that they have like much more global impact attached to them, but like that just tends to be the mentality of these people.
Now you unintentionally unlock the next topic, which is about making money, right, in the world of AI. And also partially, not directly, but indirectly connected to that, if you can also mention something about valuations, and I'm mostly talking to the VCs around the table now. But yeah, just you know, jump into this. Well, actually, Bonnie is kind of, you represent a way of making money out of AI by consulting, but of course, there must be other kinds of ways as well.
Yeah, I think I'll first just kind of comment off of what you had mentioned, where like these people in Silicon Valley are a little crazy. They want to play with the technology. And who are these people? It's everyone, right? Like Silicon Valley is made up of people from everywhere. And I can tell you that because we had more international founders in our office, maybe at least 50% on average. And so it really is, I think, like the culture of Silicon Valley as opposed to the people there. The people there are in tech for, you know, I don't know if they have much choice. Like that's kind of the main industry in the Bay Area. If you're doing anything outside of that, if you're a teacher, you might be like at an ed tech startup, right? But and that's just the reality of it. And in LA, it's the entertainment industry. But I think it's a lot about the culture of how you build there and the idea of playing with $500 million is not kind of crazy in the Bay. Like it's very, I think this is also something that was nuanced between men and women when I looked at founders and how you'd have founders who might raise a $2 million seed round, discover they couldn't find product market fit, get to the end of their runway, and then they shut the company down, and then 6 months later, they're out talking about like their failure and how they have this new idea, and everyone invests in them again. And it was something I learned just upon entering the Valley where I said, wow, they love failure here. And I'm from New York, and you know, you really just get through failure as quickly as possible to get on to the next, you know, big thing that you're working on, the hustle. It's a little bit different. And so I think the etiquette of being able to use capital as a tool to achieve success with product, with discovering your customer, discovering what is sticky, is very different than a lot of the other ecosystems I've seen pretty much everywhere else. So that's something to keep in mind, for sure. And then in terms of making money, I think, you know, we look at so many companies that are successful out of Silicon Valley, and they don't make money until they're very, very far deep into the process, right? I know it's like outside of AI a bit, but when you think about like Uber's not been profitable for the majority of its time. And my like roommate when I lived in San Francisco was at Uber, and she said Uber Eats is what generated their revenue for them, right? And so when you're figuring out how to generate revenue, it's a different, I think, trajectory for a company versus when you're like ideating with the technology. But I think there's so many different routes for generating revenue, and I think yours comes top of mind for when I'm thinking about that. I'll let you comment on it a bit.
Okay. So we're on the question of making money, deals,
Monetization, practically.
monetization.
How to make money in the world of AI, practically. And Martha, I think I'm also curious about your model, by the way.
Okay. So at the moment, my consulting has 3 verticals because that's where I'm seeing a lot of regular people, not the deep tech people of Silicon Valley, can make a difference and can earn an income from AI. So one of those is the hybrid call centers, right? For sales and customer service, because that's our expertise in the Philippines. Another is creative AI, because the tools that are coming out, they're so fast. And the graphic designers, the Canva graphic designers of yesterday is so much different from the creative AI designers that will arise from these tools. And the Philippines has a lot of creatives. And so that's why that's our second vertical. I see Vienna has a lot too. So I see that, but I don't know the regulations here. I mean, in the Philippines, we can just use all of that. No one is going to tell us no. So the third is the AI consulting certifications. So mostly on process mapping, which Chris has said, it's perfect. He explained entirely how everything will be automated. He just said it in a corporate way, but that's going to be for everyone, for every country. The gradient of how Chris explained it earlier, the gradient of this is routinary until, until the most complex task. He was, if you were able to record it, he explained it, that's it. That's AI consulting, process mapping, and those are the the verticals that I'm looking at, where Europe can also come in. But like I said, Europe, you have the capability. You have the infrastructure. We don't have that in Southeast Asia. Only Singapore has that with us. And in Asia, only China has that for us. South Korea as well. India has a lot of the talent, and we know that. The Middle East is gaining ground because they have a lot of money, and they don't want to regulate. They want to compete. And so that's why they're gaining ground. And I feel like I'm here because I need to say, the world needs you, Europe. Unfortunately, we feel that Europe that is focusing so much on regulation. But we need you to accelerate. Because if you do not accelerate, you do not know what's happening. The regulations are coming so fast, and there is regulatory effects. There are regulatory effects coming out of the regulations. And unfortunately, other countries do not respect the regulations. China does not respect it. But we need Europe's, Europe's sense of we are a global ecosystem. And what's happening in Silicon Valley and is happening in China, Europe cannot protect itself anymore just because of regulations. It's so fast. We need you to accelerate so that you know what's happening and help us. Right? Because you guys have the capability and the infrastructure. We only have the talents. And sometimes the talents that we have, we still need to upskill all of them. So that's really my main message. Chris?
Yeah. Again, from a VC perspective, maybe a very simplistic way to think about it with 2 kind of interesting wrinkles. You have actually, how many people here are founders, by the way? Founders? Cool. Okay. Probably most resonant for you guys. The rest, sorry. There's two ways. There's consumer and enterprise. Let's take consumer to start with. Consumers typically have, sorry about that, two ways of making money. One, you get to consumer level scale. Think like Reddit, Facebook, Google, whatever. You command billions of users. At that point, you can make money through advertising. That's the simplistic way. Two, the other way to do it is consumer subscription. So think like ChatGPT. You sell a service, people pay for it on a monthly basis, you get enough consumers, that's kind of the way you typically make money. Two, on the enterprise side, there's, I guess, your platforms, your services, and more enterprise-related things. Platforms tend to be like the developer tool type stuff. You build on top of the platform. You consume compute credits, sort of NVIDIA chips, whatever. You have something that's utilized that you sell for that people use embedded into something else. SaaS, so this is a software as a service subscription that you sell into companies, typically on a per user basis. And then the third one would be more like your typical enterprise sales cycle. So 1 year, 3 year contract, sort of big thing, rip and replace some existing system, rip out the BPO, whatever, but you kind of big, meatier kind of contract. So at least on the enterprise side, those are kind of the most common things that we see. Two, maybe wrinkles that are kind of interesting in this. One, in the world of AI, you actually see a lot more companies that are sort of kind of intermixed in the middle. Like ChatGPT is a consumer level subscription service, but also sells developer tools. That wasn't really common beforehand. You see it a little bit more in the world of AI, so one wrinkle. And then two, on the consulting side, you do see companies that provide the full end-to-end AI service and then charge for the output of it, not necessarily on a service basis. So one way to think about this would be like think like a customer support chat ticket. Instead of selling you the software on like a per customer service person, you could sell them it on a per resolved basis. So for every ticket that you resolve, you pay me $1. I forgot the customer service company, but there's one company that charges that way. So you charge the output of it, and then you just kind of, the more and more you do of it, the more and more you get paid. So a lot of like the things that kind of straddle the consulting world, they kind of charge in that framework. That's sort of the way to think about it from a consumer and enterprise. And again, mostly a Silicon Valley, mostly a venture scale kind of input. That doesn't necessarily cover a lot of the kind of individual consulting basis or whatever, but more from a company level.
Yeah.
Adding a point about freelancers, like entrepreneurs, but a smaller scale, I think AI is empowering a lot of capacities to make money, because before you were like, I don't know, like a photographer and that's it, and then you were selling that specific service. Now, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can actually kind of create a media company, because you have all these assistants that are allowing you to do all of these things and deliver high quality in a timely manner. So now you have like suddenly the capacity to offer a lot of services that you will have needed to hire other people for before. And also when it comes in terms of creativity and media and let's say movies, TV shows, and so on, I think AI, not only for freelancers, but for media companies, has allowed smaller companies from anywhere in the world to be able to create high quality content, and that has resulted in a more diverse set of voices telling stories, when before it was like just for Hollywood, to put it in a very extremist way. But I think that's definitely a way for like freelancer, which I think it's going to be a huge majority of the population, to leverage AI to make an income.
Yeah, so about making money with AI, as a machine learning researcher, I'm much more adept in spending lots of money on AI than making it. But actually, when I managed to turn at least somewhat of a success a startup with, let me tell you the previous startup, not the current one, because that's probably a more interesting story. Probably not politically correct, but I'll just let you in on a secret. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we wanted to create a product which we called the user experience prediction with machine learning based on collaborative filtering. As you can guess, none of our customers understood a bit of it, which is understandable. So we kind of switched the picture now and asked, okay, what's your biggest problem? And most companies said one thing or another, but there was now you would probably call him an oligarch. Back then it was Mr. Kachinov, a Russian businessman. And times changed. This was before the war. That's a disclaimer. I'm not doing anything illegal. Before the war, this Kachinov guy had two e-commerce sites in Russia. One had 20 million users and another was with 8 million users. But his biggest problem was something that we would never have guessed. It was that in Russia, people expected to get the goods they purchased delivered within 1 or 2 days. But if let's say an iPhone is in a warehouse in Moscow Oblast, to deliver it to Vladivostok, it takes 2 weeks, not 2 days. And he said, okay, you need to create a software which will tell me which product will be bought when. And oddly enough, the predictive AI just promises that. If you have a big enough data set, we can predict the future at a much better accuracy than tarot reading or something like that. So we did that, and we did that not because we were so inventive, but because someone who was in the business, boots on the ground, told us, okay, you need to do this because this is what I need. And we sort of repeated the same pattern with Tengri AI, because when we went to the Middle East, which was mentioned before, that's where the money is, not in Romania, unfortunately. So when we went to Kuwait, for instance, we asked, okay, what is where we could help you with generative image generation AI, which is not something that you could use one of the American startups. And there was quite a big company called Alganim & Sons, and they allowed me to talk about this, so I'm really happy to do so. And their biggest problem was that they have an industry where they need to create architectural visualization as fast as possible and change it on a whim of a client. Like the client says, okay, but I want this to be like with a wooden facade, and then you need to switch the whole design in a matter of minutes, ideally a worst case scenario, from one meeting to the next. And this was possible with generative AI, but this is not something that we could have guessed. So in a nutshell, I would say that in order to make money with AI, you need someone who understands a specific vertical, who knows how to make money in a domain. Ask them, okay, what's your low-hanging fruit? What problem should I solve for you? And then you need someone who's a big geek who also learned some, I don't know, maths and PyTorch and things like that, who would say, okay, I have 10 to 20 developers and we can build this for you. And this is a totally different thinking to probably Silicon Valley. I'm not sure about that. There are experts about this in here. But this is at least something that worked to me to some degree. So that's in a nutshell how to make money with AI.
I feel that the energy in the room is dropping and you're getting hungry. Food will be served soon, don't worry. Maybe I will, before everyone leaves the room, maybe you want to ask questions. Maybe you want to, I mean, I had one more topic on my head, which was about the security side of the stuff. But maybe you want to ask questions, and then I don't feel the pressure on me, but you feel the pressure on yourselves. So, who would like to ask questions? But first, let's find that guy. I love your hair, thanks.
Only you can say that.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. So not really a question, but more of a remark actually to the money and regulation side of things. So a lot of you said that this is stopping innovation, and I agree to some degree of that. You said that this is protecting people, which is also correct. But I will also argue that the regulation can also help business in the sense that it provides you with a high degree of foreseeability. So it just formulates the rules of business, and I also feel that this might have value for people with money. so for entrepreneurs, for investors, so I guess the good example of this would be, cryptocurrency, which legally used to be pretty much like a Wild West, so, and this worked very well for some people, some people got a lot of money, some people lost a lot of money, some people went to jail, these kind of things, and now it's definitely moving more towards regulation, and I think, Europe is the forefront of this, and, like, maybe this would, mean something for the people with money, for investors, like you have, like European license, so you're like legit, so I want to give my money to you, so I feel like this is, to some degree, of course, stopping innovation, but also to some degree, like giving you this security,
One small comment to that, and Silicon Valley engineers don't typically give a shit about regulation at all, except when it comes to money. Money and finance, it's actually very sensitive in the US. There's a lot of stuff around this stuff, and so people tend to be very careful about stuff like that. Also, crypto Web3 is kind of interesting. It wasn't I wouldn't really consider that like a Silicon Valley innovation. Again, I guess you could argue or disagree on exactly where and Satoshi and all that sort of stuff, but Silicon Valley was never like the core epicenter of where that came from. So that's sort of not off topic a little bit, but it's somewhat of a different branch, if you will. But yeah, finance, super regulated in the US for a good reason.
To be truly global, now I hand over the microphone to Africa.
Thank you. Although I have to say I was brought up in the UK as well. Couple of points, if I may. I don't know if you can you all hear me? In terms of just a few points that you've made, when we look at the UK, for example, the agricultural sector, we've got to be very careful because it's only 60% of products that are actually produced or grown in the UK. So that could also be a factor rather than technology. We import a lot of products into the UK. In terms of AI, I think when we look at mobile tech, and this is the African side of me, so I've got the UK and the Africa, mobile tech has been a game changer for the continent of Africa, as I'm sure it is in Asia. And the reason for that is immediately people could see what's in it for me. The problem we have with AI, and I mean, AI will become really relevant to everyone once the receptionist in this building and the cleaner in this building can actually see and have a use case for AI. With the phone, they knew immediately, I can get my money here, which means I don't need to go into town 3 hours on the bus to deposit money or to send money to the village. Immediately in Africa, even in terms of ultrasound, we can and you don't even need the internet. So I think we need to be careful how excited we become or how we are with AI, because this is an echo chamber. Most of us here probably live in privilege, have university degrees or are studying towards them, etc., etc. So we need to make AI more inclusive. That's another point. We are selling AI at the moment as efficiency. We're focusing a lot on efficiency rather than also the value added. Perhaps in medicine, when we look at the fact that it can detect cancer far sooner than the human eye can. So that's also another area. It can even tell through the lens of the eye whether it's a man or a woman or a person of color, because that also is important when it comes to transplants, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the other area. We need to sell AI, what's in it for you, et cetera, et cetera. Another point very quickly, I'll come to regulations in a second, universal basic income. I've worked with companies that actually were funded by Silicon Valley, raised nearly $500 million. That has worked in Kenya, universal basic income, not so much in Finland. Again, is it because they already had the safety net in Finland? But it has worked in Kenya. It's changed actually a lot of, the money is given, no questions asked. Unlike NGOs, who will tell you what to spend that money on, $1,000 is given to people, and it has totally changed everything, especially to the women who spend it on uniforms, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is, very last, regulations. I know many people in tech complain about regulations, but that's probably the reason why in Austria you're not eating, chlorophene, whatever, chicken or whatever it is. Because we also look at regulations in medicine. That hasn't stopped innovation. Regulation in the airline business, that hasn't stopped innovation. So we need to be careful by sort of always saying, well, regulation is slowing things down. That is true to a certain extent, but there are also ways industries have proved that despite regulation, they can still innovate. And the very last point is when we look at companies like Perplexity, etc., when we look at ethics, when we're looking at Perplexity, IP, how do we feel about, or the VCs feel about investing in companies that may actually be using copyright and other ethical products or other issues? Thank you for your patience, actually.
Thank you so much.
I would like to acknowledge what you said when you said it needs to be inclusive. And I really love that because that's one of my obsession. Because I will repeat this over and over again. China and Silicon Valley are in the race towards whatever we are going to go to. Silicon Valley already has a timeline of artificial general intelligence, correct? And they already have this who said when we're going to get artificial general intelligence. And when we say inclusivity and artificial general intelligence arrives, we don't know. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? It depends on who said it. Elon Musk said it's 2026. So, correct? So it depends on who said it. So once we have that, once we have artificial general intelligence, meaning an AI that thinks like us, or an AI who's more intelligent than us. For example, Peter mentioned Claude Sonnet 3.5, which is really good. I love it so much. OpenAI released O1, and O1 has PhD level intelligence. And whenever I ask it to think for me, it goes through all the entire step. For example, I have a report, the December 2022 report, 4 days. Now a report is 4 minutes or 4 seconds because of O1. It thinks through everything for me. And when we say inclusivity and regulations, I really love that because there are regulatory effects. And these regulatory effects, I know that we're protecting Europe and a lot of the citizens of Europe. And right now, our globalization because of AI is so fast that I am thinking, do we really need to think on a per continent basis, per country basis, or because Silicon Valley and China is so fast, how can we think as one collective consciousness already? Yes, Martha. Oh, I think I'm done. That's my message. For me, Europe needs to accelerate to be able to get a grasp and hold firmly on what Silicon Valley and China is releasing so fast. Because I agree with you that regulations are a good thing. It also comes with regulatory effects. And these regulatory effects, Silicon Valley and China, they're not, they don't care about it. They're just going to push through whatever. And in the process of inclusivity, everyone that is not Europe will get left behind.
One note here, if everyone plays by the same rules, regulation is great. Yes. But the fact is that no one is playing by the same rules. Agreed. And so there's this, again, the etiquette of like ask for forgiveness, not permission. And so when you have players that are playing with that mentality, it's really difficult to understand the progress of your acceleration when you're adhering to regulation, legislation. And I loved all of your points. You covered like so many different areas that I wish we could spend more time on. But I would argue that big pharma and the airline industry are some of the most heavily regulated industries I've ever seen, and it is the reason for why there is so much of so many of the pain points, like at least on the consumer end. I think that's the reason for it. And whenever you've got a quorum of like VCs or founders in the room, they ask, what are the industries that need to be deregulated? And I think those are the top 2 across the board. So I wouldn't use them as a good example. I think they would be the example of why regulation could hinder. And I know that's I don't agree though. Exactly, right? And I think that's,
women took that drug, and unfortunately, you could still see repercussions. So it's not about over-regulation.
Correct. Yeah, and again, I think that's a. I was going to say to your earlier point of like the regulation is negative. I think it's a very like American perspective, and then when you think of like food and drugs, I think that should be more regulated in the U.S. If there was more regulation in that respect, we'd have a lot of products off market. But to your point about inclusivity, I also think that the markets are at different stages in different on different continents, and so even when we look at Africa. When I was at 500, we launched a dozen different funds in different emerging ecosystems around the world. And it wasn't the same playbook in every ecosystem. And if we used the same playbook, it would not work. And so we sort of had to look at what we were entering into and where technology was, what did adoption look like. And so even though I think the point is to say there are so many people that are cutting the line ahead, and so if you wait in line, you will get to the front, but when?
Yes, I think probably it doesn't really matter.
It's nuanced, it's so,
Exactly.
yeah.
If we look at mobile tech, for example, in East Africa, in Kenya, I mean, you have companies that are earning $1 billion a year. Nobody here.
Like Domino's is actually one of the like
So you've got all these things, and yet neighboring countries, there's very little mobile tech. So I was using mobile tech. I don't use cash in Kenya. When I came to Austria, it was only cash. So
That's exactly right.
country by country culture as well. Austrians are very conservative. As you probably have guessed. And in the UK, this would be different. I mean, I remember a few years ago, I couldn't even get soya milk here. Now you can get it soya milk.
Exactly.
In some cultures, how they, you don't have a high death rate in Austria or Germany. UK it's about £30,000 per person. So again, it's a cultural issue as well.
Maybe one other controversial statement, but again, just stating kind of how people think about it, not saying like I necessarily indulge or believe in all these things. It's kind of interesting whenever I go to like different places or whatever, people tend to think about their own markets. Like I'm going to build a product that's for Vienna and we're going to expand to Hungary, then maybe cover like the EU or whatever. Silicon Valley people just like do not think like that. I just build a product and everybody's going to want it. You just assume that. There's no like, I'm building it for, it's just so nonsensical. Like, again, whether it's right or wrong or whatever, I take no value judgment in it. But people don't really think there in terms of markets or geography or differentiate. It's just the same thing. It's Facebook everywhere. And everybody's going to use it because they are. I don't know. I guess it kind of works. I'm not sure exactly why, but that's kind of how they think.
Go ahead.
So your example about the chicken actually really like wake up a thought in me, because I live in the US now, and sometimes I'm concerned by my health by living there and eating there. And every time I go back, I am sorry. Every time I go back to Europe and I go to Spain, I was there and I was eating a tomato and I was like, wow, that's a tomato. So I am seriously concerned, and I think like food industry here is regulated for a reason, because it's health-wise and it's a health you can see, because if you got cancer, like it's a sickness that you can identify. But here, like when we talk about mental health, it's invisible, it's difficult to understand, we don't treat it the same way. And I think with AI, we are not even thinking about the impact that it has. And the fact that China and Silicon Valley are running, I honestly don't care. Like, I don't even want to be in that race, maybe. And I think like every country has a particular economy, and that should be considered, because otherwise we're just running for no reason. And it's like speed, the only thing we are aiming for. Like, how is this impacting our mental health? And talking about the ice cream, like maybe I'm forgetting the strawberry. Is that the one? So like, yeah, there is a race, but do I want to play? I don't know. I actually have the right to consider that. So I think like maybe we're left behind, but we're left behind in what? Like the level of burned out with this speed and everything is something like we are not like taking into this place. So, yeah.
One other small comment too. Everybody always conflates Silicon Valley with these startups and huge valuations and the super sexy thing or whatever. Startups are like a small fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of companies that are created. Like most business, like most companies, businesses, whatever, like they're not, Silicon Valley startups and that, like, it's such a particular thing. I know everybody always wants to copy it and emulate it and all that, but like, you don't have to. Like that's not the, I don't think the point was to create 10 million of these things all over. It's just, it's the particular thing that works there. Yeah, so yeah, just don't conflate, like, I guess like, I kind of make it, everybody in Silicon Valley crazy, but like, that's not 100% true. Like most people are pretty normal. It just tends to be the engineers that are founders that are creating companies that are raising venture funding. It's a small world. It's a very tiny place, and we all mostly know each other.
Yeah, one more thing which I wanted to add here, especially around the regulation, a bit beating the same dead horse. Sorry for that, but I think most people, when we talk about AI, for obvious reasons, they think about something like a large language model, like maybe ChatGPT or some other LLM. But that's understandable that people think that, okay, what's the harm in it? But let's take another example. There was a peer-reviewed study which was later published in Nature in 2022 in, I think, March. So the point was that, as you probably, if you are in this room, you probably know that all machine learning is about optimizing an error function. So what they did is there is a large model which I think has one of the noblest goals for any large model. It is to find out if a molecule has any harmful effect to the human body. So you can imagine that it's a very good thing. You don't need to run clinical trials. You can just input a molecule and it will say if it has any harmful effect, and going the other way around, you can say that, okay, give me a molecule that has very little harmful effect which does this and that. So that was the base model. For the purposes of this research, the researchers inverted the error function and they let it run for 6 hours. In 6 hours, it discovered 40,000 lethal molecules. Every one of them can be used as a chemical weapon. So I think this is where regulation gets really important and really needed, because this is not something that you want in the hands of blood-crazed dictators, terrorists, and there are a lot of bad apples in the big basket of humanity. And this is why it's important to have those regulations, similarly to like airplane regulations or any sort of regulation.
But you really wanted to ask a question. Now you also raised your head. So my suggestion is that we go for one more question and then we just go on with the food. How about that?
Hello, my name is Jason de Cordova. In the late 90s, I made a search engine in Austria called AustroSearch. It was bilingual. And so I was kind of like a Silicon Valley startup here. And I did a disruptive act by hosting an Austrian search engine in Los Angeles, basically breaking the metering of data internationally, so that all the providers in Austria had to pay for international traffic for an Austrian to visit an Austrian search engine. In that process, I exited my startup as it was in 1998, and everyone was sending me these emails and letters in Los Angeles. Mr. de Cordova, what are you doing with the data of the Austrians? We had free email, free websites, and searches and all that. And it was very intimidating, but it was also very funny. And so I'm really brought back to the conversation between Angela Merkel and Obama. Hey, Obama, please stop spying on me. New phone, who's this? And so it is about not consent, it's about forgiveness. And essentially what the EU regulatory is going on in this environment here is a kind of regulatory technology. Shortly in the EU, we will have NIST 2, which will require every single company in Europe to have an audit in their IT infrastructure. No, there's some companies that just make beer, and that involves data for their own internal email communications. So actually it's transparent and will be deployed universally. And so to come to Peter's point about security, because that's essentially what we're talking about here, we're giving the responsibility to privacy to other people. But it's really our responsibility, and it is also in the internal company's responsibility. Microsoft suffered a huge break-in from the Chinese. They got the signing encryption keys. And so essentially, over 100,000 clients, including the United States military now, can't really know, is Microsoft really verifying this encryption or not? And so with AI, we really have to get down back to the basics. It's not necessarily about this thing about fast and loose with data. It's more like we don't really have a cloud infrastructure that's secure. And that's something that I worked on and I still work on. I'm a FreeBSD enthusiast. And so as a search engine architect, I feel it is now the golden age of AI. And so I had my startup for 10 years, but now I'm coming back into the area because I feel like the market and the business community and the technology is now ready. So thanks, and I'd love to hear some comments.
Yeah. Well, one other dimension to that, which kind of just made me think about it, similar to the crazy people doing things for no freaking reason, there's also a huge community in Silicon Valley, open source, you guys probably know. There's a lot of people who just build, open, run, maintain software publicly because they like to, because they want to, because they think it's important. And a lot of companies, actually a lot of companies actually rely on this. I mean, Linux is one of the biggest server distros like in the entire planet. Like almost everything runs on it. And that was built by a dude who just put it out there, Linus Torvald. So there's, again, a lot of the motivations and factors that you kind of imbue on this stuff. Like there is this, I guess, cultural element to Silicon Valley of people who just like doing this stuff for the sake of it and putting things out there. And the more you can see and open and audit and all that, I think that is, again, at least on the enterprise security side, that's a hugely beneficial thing. Because the more proprietary stuff we rely on, the more you can't fundamentally trust it from a company side or from an individual perspective. So there's a lot of people who take this stuff pretty seriously too.
Anyone else want to comment on this? Because if not, then my dream is that you don't go home right away, but we start eating, drinking outside. I heard that even alcohol is being served. Yeah. So and you know, you just keep on, you know, like pushing these guys with your questions, and you connect and you make new LinkedIn friends tonight. You know, things like that. So please stay with us as long as you can, and let's eat all the food.
Good quality Austrian food.
Sorry?
Good quality Austrian food.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, guys, for making it. And thanks for coming. Goodbye, online followers. You can't eat with us. Maybe I should bring it with me to the restroom, just like in an old Leslie Nielsen movie, you know?